afternoon. My name is Joshi, and I'm lucky to have with me two industry legends, Len Monheit and John Benninger. Each of them are here to talk about transparency with me as it relates to Asia and the supply chain. So thank you guys for coming aboard. If you guys don't mind, just quickly tell me a little bit about yourselves, and then I'll start asking some questions.
All right. My name is Len Monheit. I'm the CEO of Industry Transparency Center. So I've been in this industry for about 25 years. I'm a junior compared to John, I think. But our ethos is all about transparency, and my background is global. It's about the ingredients and health ingredients for all their applications, and then supply chain implications of that.
Great, we'll get into that for sure.
Yeah, and so John Benninger, Informa Markets, Vice President and Market Leader for our supply side portfolio. And like Len said, been around for a long time in this market since it was much smaller. And through the growth of the market and our trade shows and our media, transparency has always been a huge part of that, because we have to deliver products to consumers that they can trust, they can believe in, and that give them the results they want.
That's what it's all about. So transparency as a whole, can you guys tell me why is it so important? And it's different for each part of the supply chain going down, right? The farmer, the brand owner, the consumer. Can you guys tell me, in your guys' feeling, why is transparency so important right now? Transparency as a whole, if you don't mind, kind of.
Well, I think it always has been, because there's a value to being honest, and there's been a perceived value on the whole part of the brand holders and consumers, because it leads to trust. But then over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, knowing where you're getting your products from, knowing who those supply chain partners are, what they stand for, and how reliable they are, has become even more important. And the only way you do that is focus on transparency.
I love it. Yeah, and I think we've had some pretty high profile lack of transparency issues over time, and whether it's in the dietary supplement industry or the food and beverage industry, really any industry, anywhere where commerce is done, where someone is paying money for a product or a service and they don't get what they thought they were supposed to get, that's a problem. And it just doesn't fly anymore. It never has really, but now, especially with technology, Len, you talk about this a lot, the younger generations and technology, access to information.
Yeah.
It's just not acceptable anymore to be opaque.
Okay. Yeah, and over the 5 years, what do you think's changed? Because I saw you jumping on it.
Well, the 5 years, I was also going to talk about the younger consumers and the information access. You can't bury your skeletons forever.
Okay.
They're going to come out. There's just too much information. There's too much more accountability. So you have to get ahead of that. And transparency we describe as a journey. Okay, you may not be absolutely transparent. There may be some things culturally you can't change and disclose, and no one's just asking you to disclose everything to impact confidentiality, but it is a journey. There's got to be progress towards transparency. Consumers will resonate with that. One of the things that happened over the course of the last 5 years is that supply chains have become under the microscope. We never used to really understand as consumers or as brands just the convolution of how we get our products and how we get them made. But then suddenly, 3 years ago, we had all this supply chain disruption. And I mean, the cargo ships in the docks and the containers and the access to containers, and things couldn't move, and worker communities and farmer communities lost access to mainlands, whatever. People, consumers, brands suddenly realized how vulnerable they were if they didn't understand supply chain, and that put pressure and put the impetus, but also put value into transparency.
Yeah, no, and that's fair, right? I think, you brought up a really good point in the sense of, I'm going to change to, how do we manage this and show these consumers? And again, technology, you both use the word technology, you're talking about younger generations who are so enthralled with it, who have access to it, who know how to use it. What are the ways we can do this? Are there tools, are there certain ways? What do you guys think?
Well, certainly just that willingness to be open and honest. It starts there. So technology is a wonderful tool. We can use that, but it has to start inside the organization with a willingness to be honest, vulnerable sometimes. That's where that trust comes from. And so even before technology, companies would do tours, invite people into their facilities, do video work to show what happens, to tell their story. And besides the part of transparency that is look, we're not doing anything wrong. There's that whole part of, look at all the stuff we're doing that's right. People love authentic stories, and especially those younger consumers. They want to know, what are the values of this organization that I may be purchasing a product from? And so how do you do that? You tell your story. You tell it honestly and you own it. And if you use technology to do it, cool. But tell your story and realize there's value there.
And let people in, let people see
let
the
people
vulnerability.
in.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I was very interested when the blockchain technologies emerged a couple years ago.
Okay.
And blockchain in practice in banking and sort of that irrefutable, that type of approach to technology is great, but where does that really apply and where does that apply to consumers? I think the biggest issue is that it does connect and provide authenticity and traceability, and that is part of the story because that's what consumers are looking for. They're looking for this authenticity. That leads to trust. And then the traceability answers the other question about how can I know that there's accountability all the way through the chain? And that is also going to tie to a better relationship, but also more confidence in the safety of the entire supply chain.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that we've got savvy consumers, 18 to 35, that are demanding more information. So the younger demographics, and that's the future of our industry, their lifetime value for us as providers of supplements and healthy foods and beverages, that's our holy grail. And that's what they're looking for. And the companies that are actually understanding that and meeting them on their terms right now are going to be the beneficiaries and are going to reap the rewards because they're going to get that lifetime value. So there's a commercial motivation to doing this.
No, it's fair. So, the word surety, you brought that up. That's interesting. So India is on this journey to $100 billion in this sector as a combined effort. What can India do as a country? And you've mentioned multiple things in the sense of bring people, show them your factories, show them your fields, open up. You're talking about blockchain in a sense. What can India do, and what would you guys, suggest that India might want to take on? As this is a challenge, right? It's a challenge to gain the trust globally from outside players. What do you guys suggest?
Well, it's that storytelling, definitely, and there are a lot of different ways to do that. And India has a great story. It's an authentic story. I think about the thousands of years of Ayurvedic medicine, the science of life. There's so much good stuff there that can pull people into the story because there's the technical part of it, right? Well, we're going to give you all the data on our supply chain, and here are the tests we run, and here are the test results and the audits and all that. And that can be a little bit numbing. Sometimes, a consumer in particular, if you're in the trade, maybe you want that level of detail. But a lot of consumers, it's just going to be too much for them. But that storytelling can really, I think, pull them in and make it interesting, because it is interesting. You look at, every time I come here to India, I learn so much. And how do we help other people come to India, even if they, aren't able or willing to take that flight and, a day and a half of travel to get here? How do we bring India to them? That's where a role that I think we can play as communicators, as media, whether it's through video or any other means to help tell these stories and invite people in.
I like it.
I'm going to maybe rephrase a little bit of what, from my perspective, the real issue is why India?
Great.
And so part of that is the tradition. Part of that is also the expertise that transcends the developments in pharmaceuticals and the credibility in pharmaceuticals and material production at a very, very high level, leveraging that. So that combination of that traditional expertise, botanicals excellence, and then the manufacturing excellence is part of that foundation of why India. But I think that story as an umbrella needs to be told as a starting point. And I think many of the companies, if you think about it from a company's perspective, they leverage that, they tell that and how they've applied it, and then that's the story that then goes out to the broader industry.
Yeah,
got it.
And then the verification of that, right? That trust part. You can tell your story, but how do I know it's true? We've seen it in all kinds of areas where, the story that a company is telling sounds great, but is it really the truth? And so that's where we need those third-party either auditors or certifiers or systems in place to make sure that the story that I'm hearing really is the truth. Who's making sure?
Yeah, the trust but verify. Definitely,
Yeah.
that's something that makes sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned credibility. That's good. Let's turn to geopolitical climate that we're in right now. When it comes to transparency and traceability, the geopolitical climate's definitely shifted, definitely changed. Again, let's take India where we are today. Let's look at it, and how do you guys see it playing a role as we go forward in this environment in today's?
Well, the last 4 or 5 years has been an amazing transcendental shift in awareness and the geopolitics. China still closed down, essentially. There's not much movement there. The United States manufacturing operation has realized that they need repatriation, they need redundancy, but they need trusted supply chain. The global relationships are frayed. India stands in a very good position with good geopolitical relationships, not so elsewhere. The time is now. And I know from a North American perspective, redeveloping reliable supply chains is paramount. That doesn't necessarily mean repatriation. And a lot of these ingredients you can't repatriate. It just doesn't work. So the opportunity right now, the fluidity in the North American marketplaces and the European marketplaces, they're looking for this trusted environment that they can invest in, they can partner with, they can collaborate with. And we're seeing supply chain relationships change over the course of the last 3 to 4 years, dramatically change.
Yeah, exactly what Len said. Now's the time. Now's the time. The opportunity is now. So even at this conference, all the conversation that's going on, now is the time. Now's the time for India to really step in.
And then going to, you'd mentioned the programs to verify, right? These verification programs and all these steps through the supply chain, they cost. They have a hard cost associated with them. How do we either manage those costs, defray those costs along the whole chain? Because again, there's this, you can't put it on one link in the chain. It becomes a little overburdensome and really costly. And if you're talking about a foreign manufacturer, it's a big number on their P&L. So please, tell me what you think.
I want to dig into this because we've
Love
got
it.
consumer research that we've been grabbing from around the world for the last 5 to 6 years. And we do this with an ingredient up approach, a health concern approach, a country approach, a demographic approach. So all the slicing and dicing that you can do. And one of the questions we ask, how much does transparency influence your decision to buy? And then what are the factors you associate with transparency that you're willing to make a business decision on? So you go where the consumer is. And ultimately, if you take a look at all of our supply chains, the biggest margins and the most elasticity, the biggest opportunity to change pricing, biggest marketing dollars, biggest dollars of lifetime acquisition of what it means to get a new consumer, it's at the consumer. So if we have information, and we do, that consumers are willing to spend behind transparency, that needs to be presented at all levels of the supply chain because that should reflect in their buying decisions, but also, again, the price that they put on the shelves. It's there. The data is there. Consumers will say they'll pay more for transparent operations.
I think one of the challenges in that certification, auditing, verification piece is there are just so many. This is not new, right? Think about all the different things that you could have certified or verified, all the different symbols and seals and logos and everything else. And boy, it's tough. That adds to the cost. And so I don't know if this will be popular or not, but some consolidation, some organization there would probably help industry, at least when I think about all the, from fair trade to organic to sustainable, regenerative agriculture, kosher, halal, GMP, it goes on and on and on, all the certifications you could get. There's one company in particular that I think has made it a mission to get every certification possible. And so when you go by their booth at our trade show, you see all these logos and symbols, and wonderful, that's great that they're making that investment, but it's just not doable for most companies, I don't think.
And I'm going to agree mostly, but I'm going to challenge because a lot of companies just get the certifications, not understanding how they're going to utilize them. And you got to be smarter about that, and the decision-making process needs to be different. You don't necessarily need a gluten-free certification if that's not really going to address your target market. And I think a lot of companies just blindly go after whatever certification du jour is, and they just slap it there. They don't even have room on the labels for other certifications, but they get it, but it's not marketable. You have to think about what's going to resonate with the consumer population that's your addressable population. What's going to be meaningful. And not all equals up. It doesn't always match up. And I think the companies at brand level don't understand that.
Fair enough. Now India's going into it, right? And you got this opportunity to really create kind of a certification or whatever it could be, a standard that exists maybe. Is there a way in which we can consolidate them here as India leaves here and goes to the rest of the world? Is there one that they can probably get behind? Or what do you think? Is that worth even looking at?
So I parse the certification and seals into two big buckets. Mm-hmm. One is based on quality and the other is based on values.
Okay.
So, I mean, in general sense, like it doesn't, I mean, there's a little bit of a gray and murky area, but if it's, say, non-GMO, that's values. Mm-hmm. If it's quality-based, like a USP or something like that, or an NSF, that is quality-based, very squarely. Mm-hmm. And I think if you start thinking about that in those two buckets, and when we do our consumer research, we talk about quality certifications versus value-based certifications. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where I would start. So I would organize around that. I would say the value-based certifications that have merit in this market, coming out of this market, or also into this market, should be this. I mean, halal is going to apply here much more than it's going to apply in other areas of the world. It's not as important in a European environment generally. So it's got to be a priority here from a values aspect. But I think you need to organize fundamentally around quality and values.
So again, right, identity testing, for example, is part of certain GMP programs, yep. Right? So can you do the same thing potentially with the transparency aspect, the traceability? Again, trust but verify, and make that a step in there. I don't know, what do you guys think?
A big part of it, I think, is just that access to information. So a lot of this work is being done. Right? Companies are investing in this type of work, whether it's using third-party labs or their own labs or certifiers and that sort of thing. But how do I get, as a consumer or a retailer or anyone involved in the entire value chain, how do I get access to that information? Some companies are pretty good at it. You know, I think about there's a Gaia Herbs, they have that Meet Your Herb program where there's a little QR code or a number on every single box, every single product. And just as a consumer, I can plug that in and learn everything about what exactly is in that bottle and where it came from and all of that. But that's an exception, that's not the rule.
Well, I think that this is the era finally of QR codes actually being really practical and useful. Mm-hmm. We went to paperless systems over the course of the last 3-4 years, and people got used to scanning QR codes in a way that they've never done before. Consumers have realized the value of QR codes. So I think there's an intuitive gap that has now been filled. And I think this is now the era of consumerism through QR. I actually think that it's a technology that's viable, and I think much more information can and should be used there. And if we can harmonize the type of information so the consumer expectation learning curve is crushed, so it's really easy to get the information that's important, I think it'd be great.
And you mentioned blockchain earlier, right? Yep. And in theory, this could, what do you think?
Absolutely.
Go up on there somehow?
Yeah, exactly.
And how would that work, you think?
Well, I mean, I think you have to touch every aspect of the supply chain. Okay. Obviously, for this to work, it has to go all the way from the field to the consumer purchase experience. We've got a demographic of 35 to 54-year-old consumers that are looking for country of origin information. Okay, so you need to track back to all the sources of the countries. They want that information. There's equality consumers. They want the quality information. So that's where your certificates of analysis and that information, as needed, comes into the play. Blockchain does all of that. So that's one way to do this and connect all those dots.
And all that information is already being gathered and stored. You have to have it for compliance reasons, right? I mean, unfortunately, still a lot of it isn't digitized in this and other markets more and more, but you have a lot of it still in non-digital formats. So that's an area that we need to continue to work on as an industry also.
But let's face it, the progressive companies are already moving towards paperless.
Gotcha. That's fair.
So the movement is there. It's a matter of time. I mean, you don't want to disenfranchise good companies. So there's a little bit of a challenge there, but this is going to be a paperless environment. It needs to be.
Yeah. And then one last question before we wrap it up here. If there's a bad story in regards to transparency in your products and things, how do you manage that and how do you deal with that?
Transparently. I think you do risk analysis.
Yeah.
Core risk analysis. What's the worst thing that can happen if you do nothing?
Okay.
I think you start with what's the worst thing that can happen if you do nothing, and then it's a continuum. It's a spectrum from there. You don't have to say that, well, we had an operator that really wasn't trained very effectively, and this, that, the other, and this is why you've got a product that actually, worst case scenario, has impurities that are going to cause adverse events. What you do say is that we've got work to do on our training in order to ensure you, our suppliers, will have zero adverse events. We're working towards that.
I think the same thing applies at the industry level. So certainly at the product level and the company level, how do you deal with it? Well, more transparency. And at an industry level, we as an industry have to be honest. We have to let the world know that we are imperfect, but here's what we're doing to get more perfect. We'll never be perfect, but here's what we're doing to get more perfect. And that builds trust when you're vulnerable and you're willing to share something, even if it isn't great news.
And I think that, so we as an industry, and this is riffing off what John said, we as an industry some have sort of kept the skeletons close, and it's hurting us because we don't have fundamental solutions. I'm going to call it the program of BAP and the Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program. Sometimes there is irredeemable material that enters the supply chain. What happens on the North American shores is that it gets rejected one place, goes back in the supply chain, ends up in market. Okay, we've been doing that for the history of the industry, and it's been a known problem that has not had an addressable solution. There is one now through ABC's program, the American Botanical Council's program. The contract manufacturers in our industry tend to be the most opaque or the least transparent aspects of our industry. They need to be at the tables, the conversations and the education, and that's actually where the BAP program, in my opinion, can make the most difference, is getting the contract manufacturers to understand the collective industry liability we have with inferior product.
Fair enough. All right, well, I think we're up. John, Len, thank you so much both for your time. Appreciate it. All this talking on transparency. Let's go out and do some good.
Absolutely.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right, take care.